Welcome to the Sean Spicer Show. Today, we're talking about the Trump indictments, all four of them. There are a lot of questions that I think need to get answered and that people are asking. So guess what? We're going to do that today. We're going to bring on an amazing guest to discuss all of these indictments, what we need to know about them, where the Trump team should be worried, where they should not. We're going to talk to Professor Alan Dershowitz. I used to have him on Spicer & Company all the time. I actually grew up watching him as an attorney argue a case called the Von Bulow case in Rhode Island. It was a big deal back then. You've probably heard of it, but he's done everything. He's a professor emeritus at Harvard University. He's a constitutional legal expert. He's written tons of books. He's got a new one out called Get Trump, which literally predicted all this. But here's why I think it's important that Alan Dershowitz answer these questions. He's never voted for Trump. And you're probably thinking to me, well, then why are you having him on, Sean? Because this is the point. Dershowitz cares about the law. He actually will tell you, I don't like Trump. I've never voted for him. And I'm a staunch Democrat. But Alan Dershowitz cares about the law. And he looks at what's happening to the law and how it's being interpreted because literally the title of his book, people want to get Trump. And I look at this as a long-term problem. If we're willing to get Trump at any cost, what does that mean for the future of the legal system, for the future of how we interpret the Constitution? And there's a lot of people out there asking me about the 14th Amendment. Can Trump be removed on the ballot? New Hampshire's talking about that. I'm going to ask him all of these questions about federal court, state court, which case worries him the most, what the team should be worried about. What about the 14th Amendment? Can he be removed from the ballot and what would happen? Let's get to it. We got a lot to break down. All right, as I said, an amazing conversation coming up with Alan Dershowitz. But I want to give you a second, not to go to the bathroom, not to leave the room, stay. This is a great conversation. I'm excited about it. I need you to do me a huge favor. Go to two places. Go online, go to YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification button, and then go to Apple Podcasts. If you go to Spotify, that's great too. Rumble, I'm all for it. Go to all four. Go anywhere. I mean, I don't care. Wherever you get those podcasts and watch your shows. But getting the subscription and making sure you're notified is important for two reasons. One, God forbid we ever get canceled or you're not watching it on the first. You want to be able to get it. You want to have a backup. Second, you're on the move, right? I know this all the time. I go to work out. I go somewhere I want to listen. I can't necessarily stream it. So if you get it on Apple, you get it. And then obviously the big thing is it helps us. It shows support for the show. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for doing that. But let me tell you one quick thing before we get into this conversation as well. This morning I got up, kids are getting ready for school. They're having their breakfast. Boom, 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 boom. But guess what? I'm not as spry as I once was. So how did I start before I even got into my breakfast? I don't drink coffee. If you catch me out there, I will occasionally have a cup. I'm not lying. I kicked my morning off with Morning Kick. I literally take the scoop, put it out, put it in a glass of cold water, sometimes with ice, sometimes with not. That's not important. But I looked at what Chuck Norris did. The guy's 83 years old. We all know Chuck Norris. He can probably crush any of us. He's 83 years old. I didn't know that. And he looks amazing. I'm not 83, and I don't feel half as good. So when Chuck announced that he had created this new formula because he had looked everywhere. He had done all the supplements. He does all the workouts. I mean, this is a guy, I'm like, if that works for him, I want to do it. But he realized if he created his own concoction of prebiotics, probiotics, they each do different things. One helps you lose weight. One helps you with digestion. Plus, he's got superfoods in there that help you with joints, mobility. He put them all together in a formula he calls My Morning Kick. And all of these things help you with your supplements on getting better. You got more energy, better digestion, clearer thinking. That's something, all three things we should all agree on. Even the left should agree on that, right? So if you want to do it like what I do, then go to mymorningkick.com /Spicer. You get 10% off. I do it every morning. First thing I do, literally plop it in there, mix it around. I actually think it tastes great. I love it. I don't mix it with anything, just the water. Go to mymorningkick.com /Spicer. You get 10% off. We'll all have different results. But the bottom line is Chuck Norris should be like the North Star. It's like, I want to look like him. I want to have the mobility, the fitness, the clarity. So losing weight, digestion, clarity, all things Morning Kick gives you. mymorningkick.com/Spicer. That'll get you going. Anyway, all right. As I said, a great conversation headed your way with Alan Dershowitz. As I said before, he's a perfect person because he's an expert. He's seen it all legally. Tons of books on all sorts of things. But the current one is literally called Get Trump. Get Trump. He knew this was coming. He's defended Trump. He stood in the well of the Senate of the United States as a liberal Democrat defending Donald Trump. This is the guy who's willing to sacrifice everything for the rule of law, for the Constitution. That's who I think we should be paying attention to. Because there's a bunch of people on the right, and I get it. I've listened to them all. But my view is that this guy on the left is willing up to say what is happening now is wrong. And he doesn't like Trump. He doesn't like his style. He doesn't like his politics. But he's undergone a ton. You want to talk about somebody who's been canceled. The left can't stand this guy. He's told me before he can't go to different religious events because he's been disowned and ridiculed. For what, though? For standing up for the truth. So I'm excited to share with you a great conversation. I think I've encapsulated almost all the questions that I've heard people have asked me to ask him. So I want to get into it now with Alan Dershowitz. Professor Alan Dershowitz, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, look, there's so much to break down, and you are the perfect person to break it down. I want to start with this, though. Yesterday, Mark Meadows was in court down in Fulton County. He's making the case that he's a federal official, he's the White House chief of staff, and that he should be having this case tried in federal court because not only was it a federal official, but the call that was made to Secretary of State Raffensperger occurred over state lines, right? White House is in D.C., the Secretary of State's in Georgia. So first of all, one, will he be successful in that motion? And secondly, why hasn't President Trump asked for the same thing?
Well, President Trump will if Meadows is successful. Trump has an even stronger case than Meadows, but Meadows has a very, very strong case. He made his call as chief of staff on the orders of the president. Now, they say it was an illegal call, but that would mean that nobody could come under the statute because people who come under the statute are always charged with crime. So the other side will always argue, well, it was outside of his duties, it was criminal. That's not what the statute was intended to do. It was intended to take accusations of crimes committed by federal officials while on duty as federal officials and move them to what was regarded as a more objective federal court than a more possibly biased state court. In this case, of course, the bias is there. The county is overwhelmingly Democrat and anti-Trump. So there's a very strong argument to move the case to federal court. And if he prevails, I think Trump will make the same argument. Giuliani may make the argument as well.
Here's what I don't understand as a layperson. If you were President Trump, and you just said it yourself, has a stronger case. He's literally the president. There's no question he's a federal official, and he's the one actually making the call. Are you risking something by having Meadows make the first move? Because if he was unsuccessful, wouldn't it therefore be a higher bar potentially?
Well, I don't think Trump controls Meadows at this point. Meadows has an excellent, very experienced lawyer who's making those decisions. And I think it cuts both ways. I think even if Meadows were to lose, Trump would have a good chance of winning. It depends on the language that the court used. Now, I know Rudy Giuliani is going to try this as well. He's not a federal official, but he was employed as a lawyer for the president of the United States. So he, too, is going to try to come under this statute. And there are very, very few precedents on it. And so the case may get fairly quickly to the Supreme Court, because if they lose, they may seek what's called an interlocutory appeal or a mandamus, some way of getting the case from the trial court up to the Court of Appeals and then eventually to the Supreme Court. And that may also delay the trial. I mean, this is all about timing. You know the strategy. The prosecutors want to get a down and dirty conviction against Trump and his associates as quickly as possible, in as biased a jurisdiction as possible, knowing that they risk appellate reversal. But if they can get the conviction before the election and the appellate reversal occurs after the election, well, they've achieved their goals of election interference.
So, you know, as a boy, I first came to know you when you were defending Klaus von Bülow. And I grew up at my father's office was just down the street from that courthouse. And I a couple times snuck in and watched the great Alan Dershowitz. So you know Rhode Island. The RICO statute, I mean, I think was almost made for organized crime in places like Rhode Island. Did it surprise you that Fani Willis, the DA in Georgia, used a RICO statute to go after Trump? Because again, as a layperson, I look at this and say, so a lot of this seems to be them going after lawyers talking to a client.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I predicted in my book, Get Trump, I predicted all four of these indictments. I predicted them correctly. Mark Levin called me the Nostradamus of lawyers. What I did not predict is that they would go after him on RICO, because it's foolish. It's stupid. The New York Times today, which is certainly very anti-Trump, had an op-ed by a lawyer from Georgia saying how foolish it was to use the RICO statute. I had a client once, a nice man of Italian-American background, and he was indicted under RICO, and he said to me, "Hey, Alan, these RICO statute, it's anti-Italian." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "They call it RICO. They don't call it Morris. They don't call it James. They call it RICO. All my friends are named RICO." Obviously, everybody knows that the RICO statute was aimed at the Italian mafia. It was then extended to drug cartels and sometimes very complex business dealings. It was never intended to be used against political organization against an election. Look, I was part of Trump. I was part of Gore versus Bush. I represented the voters of Palm Beach County in the Butterfly Ballot. Were we a RICO? We were together. We were challenging everything. We were calling for selective recounts. Professor Tribe was coming up with all kinds of weird ideas about how to challenge this election and that election everywhere. Nobody dreamed of going after us for RICO. We were just citizens that were exercising our First and Sixth Amendment rights, the right to petition the government and the right to counsel.
So in the book, you lay out these charges. You predict. By the way, after this is done, I'm going to ask you for Powerball numbers. If you have kids or you can remember growing up, you know what it's like to be left in the dark. It's scary. As adults, we're not usually scared. But I think right now, if you think about the threats that our power grid faces, we not be as scared as we were as a little kid that needs a nightlight. But at least a kid, you can have a nightlight. Right now, there are threats to our power grid that may ensure that we live in darkness. And that's not an exaggeration. There have been hits on these power grids and these substations recently at a level that national security experts are very, very concerned about. Because their view is if these things got knocked out, these substations, these power stations, then it would knock out the grid for up to 18 months. Think about that for a second. Being in darkness, not just at night, throughout, and we're entering the winter months when it gets darker sooner, but it wouldn't just be the darkness. Think about all the stuff that we power, our phones, our computers, our refrigerators. So having a personal power supply is important. Having a solar power system would be great. And if you can get that right now with Patriot Power Generator, it's a solar generator that you can take anywhere. It ensures that you always have power because it comes from the sun. So you can power those phones and computers, even your refrigerator. You can take it anywhere. You can put it in your car. You can bring it with you if you had to travel. You can also put it inside your house, which you can't do with a regular generator. If you go to 4Patriots, the number 4Patriots.com, and you enter the code SPICER, you get 10% off your first purchase. You get a warranty and free shipping over $97. Go to 4Patriots.com. In the event that anything ever happened to our power grid, you are going to be the go-to family. You're going to protect your family and make sure you have a power source to take care of all those things, medical devices, phones, computers. And yes, the 4Patriots power grid will take care of your refrigerator, making sure you have a food supply. I guess the thing that I find fascinating is the people that I talk to seem to say the law is out the window in a lot of these cases, meaning that the desire to get Trump, the name of your book, is so overwhelming that a lot of people on the left, and frankly, lawyers as well, and judges potentially, are willing to overlook what should be common sense things that you're describing because they want to literally get Trump.
Yeah, I'm reminded when I was a young civil rights worker, I went down south in the early 1960s, and we were trained at Howard University. And we were told, do not spit on the sidewalk because they will arrest you for destroying government property. Do not put a cigarette out on the sidewalk. Do not cross against the light. They're out to get you. Get civil rights workers, and they will convict you. So you have to make sure you do nothing, even arguably, that it subjects you to arrest. That's what's going on here. They're going after lawyers. They're going after political consultants. They're going after anybody. The 65 Project has threatened to disbar and discipline any lawyer who defends Trump. So I wrote an op-ed piece calling them a bunch of McCarthyites. What do you think they did? They filed a bar charge against me in Massachusetts. And they're going after everybody. Obviously there's no substance to the bar charge they filed, but nonetheless, it's costing me a lot of money, and it means I can't appear in certain courts until it's resolved. They'll stop at nothing to get Trump. They don't care who they run over in their way. They must get Trump, and they must get him before the election because the goal is to prevent him from voting. Look, I have a constitutional right to vote against Trump for the third time, just like you have a constitutional right to vote for him. And Project 65 and judges and prosecutors shouldn't be able to interfere with our right to cast a ballot for or against Donald Trump. That's the American way.
So you mentioned getting the conviction, and I agree with you, both in the Georgia case and the Jack Smith case in D.C., where just the jury pool is such that it doesn't really matter what the facts are. There's a predisposition to go after folks on the right, and definitely Donald Trump. And so when I asked the president's son, Don Jr., at the debate, he mentioned he thought it would definitely go to the Supreme Court. Do you see it playing out that way? And frankly, does the timeline allow for it? Meaning, if he were convicted, do they have to review it in time?
Well, you've asked, as usual, the hardest questions and the most important question. It's all about timing. There are two ways of getting into the Supreme Court. One, to make an appeal before the trial. It's called an interlocutory appeal or writ of mandamus, and put it on a fast track and get it to the Supreme Court. That's possible. The other is to wait for conviction, which is allowing them to achieve their goal, and then trying to put it on a fast track before the election. The latter is more difficult because trials, when they're appealed, have lots and lots of paper to go through. Take, for example, this case in D.C., where this trial judge has decided to have the case tried in 6 months. Now, there are, according to my calculations, 12.8 million documents that the government turned over as exculpatory. You know what they do? They pull a trick. They give you 12 million documents. There may be 200 that are really relevant, but you have to play needle in the haystack. You have to go through every one of the 12 million documents to find the several hundred that are really, really exculpatory. At a pace of every day reading the documents, you'd have to read 71,111 pages a day. I'm as fast a reader as there is, and I've done all these cases on appeal. I can read carefully maybe 1,000 pages a day. If I really rush, maybe 1,500. But 71,000 pages a day, I would refuse to appear in court. I would say to the judge, Your Honor, I don't care how many robes you're wearing and how many oaths you've taken and who nominated you and who confirmed you. No judge can make me commit malpractice. No judge can make me engage in ineffective assistance of counsel. It's like asking a brain surgeon to open up someone's skull without seeing the CAT scan, the PAT scan, and the blood test. That's not the way I practice law, Your Honor. That may be the way you run your courtroom, but it's not the way I practice law. And I refuse to participate in this charade, and you should refuse as well. Let's see if the lawyers are prepared to make that kind of an argument. They should.
So you've got these 4 cases, and this goes to the heart of what you're talking about in terms of timing. The judge in D.C., Chutkin, just announced that she set the date for March 4th, which just coincidentally happens to be the day before Super Tuesday.
Right.
But what would you advise the team, the Trump legal team, in terms of, I get what your point. I think that's brilliant, right? Here's how many documents there are. Here's how many the average person can read. Here's how big our legal team is. Your Honor, you're asking us to do X. But there's 4 different cases. How should they approach the timing on each one? I mean, I'm not asking you to dissect each one of them, but it seems like this is a car crash. They're all coming together.
Well, in my book, Get Trump, I do dissect each of the 4 cases. And right now, there are 3 trials scheduled for March. 3 trials scheduled for March. Each one will probably take months and are among the most important cases in American history. 3 scheduled for March. These judges are just violating the Constitution left and right, mostly left. And then there's 1 case scheduled for May. No lawyer can ever do that. And you know what the judge and the prosecutors are saying? Well, you don't have to read every page. Yes, I do.
Right.
I don't assign young kids right out of law school to do my work for me. I read every page when I'm doing a case, when I'm doing a trial. And you never know what you're going to find, a nugget in one case. I won a case a few years ago where everybody missed a point, an important point. I found it in reading the transcript, and we won the case as the result of that. If I had been rushed to read 71,000 pages in a day, I never could have found that. And, you know, what happens is you lose the case, then you make a motion for a new trial based on violation of the Jenks rule or the Brady rule that require government to turn over material. Then the government comes in and says, see, on page 11,633, footnote 7, that piece of evidence was there and the defense failed to find it. Shame on them. It's their fault. They waived it.
Right.
That's the argument that's going to get made. They're setting it up for a scandal. And it's unfair and it's unwise for the judges to participate in this. The judges should say, I'm going to give the defense as much time as they need. And Judge Chutkan, she doesn't know the law. She basically said that the Constitution gives the right to the government for a speedy trial. She said there's a public interest in a speedy trial. No, there's not. Only the defendant has the right to a speedy trial. The government must give you a fair trial, not a speedy trial.
So one
and
of
a
the
fair trial requires time to prepare.
So all of the arguments that you just brought up make complete sense, and they're rooted in the law. One of the things that the judges have imposed on Trump is this quasi-gag order, saying that if he intimidates witnesses, if he says stuff, he will be in violation of his bond. One would believe that the arguments that you just made to me that are in your book would be ones that would be protected under the First Amendment because he can express himself. But given how you've described the process, okay, not what the law is, but what you just said to me about how these judges are interpreting it, is there a concern or should there be a concern from Trump and his team that one of these judges is going to find him in violation of these quasi-gag order about what he can and cannot say, especially on social media?
There is a risk of that. I don't think a judge would do that. You remember, we have a presumption of innocence. Under the law, Trump, you and I have exactly the same status. 3 of us are innocent people. Trump, however, has been indicted not by grand juries, because grand juries have nothing to do with the indictment process. They're just chairs that are moved around by the prosecution. The best proof of that is in Georgia, where they leaked the indictment before it was voted. We know that grand juries have no influence. We know that a grand jury will indict anybody a prosecutor wants him to. So what's happened? Prosecutors have decided these guys are guilty, and suddenly they lose all their rights. What about the presumption of innocence? No. Look, you can't tamper with witnesses, but if you tamper with witnesses, you've committed a crime, so they can arrest them for that. There's no need to impose bail conditions. Bail conditions are supposed to guarantee 2 things. Number one, that the person doesn't flee. And believe me, Donald Trump's not going anywhere. Right. Even if he didn't have that mugshot, he'd be the most recognized person in the world. And number 2, that he won't commit kind of violent crimes that are irremediable. None of that's at work here. They're using the fact that there's been an indictment, a fake indictment, because all indictments essentially are fake, to prevent him from campaigning in his style. I don't like his style. That's why I don't vote for him. But that's his style. And he attacks people. And he calls them names. And some judge might think of that as witness intimidation. I don't think of that as witness intimidation. I think of that as, Trump's politics.
All right. Sorry to pause the conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's going really well. But I just want to stop for a moment and thank one of our sponsors, Delta Rescue. As a dog lover, as a person who's rescued 3 dogs, it's always important to make sure that we're supporting organizations that take care of the animals that we love. And so you might not be a dog lover. Maybe you love cats or horses or a ton of other animals. Delta Rescue takes care of all of them. And if you go to deltarescue.org, you can find out about the work that they do, because they do all the stuff: veterinary care, food, make sure that these cats and dogs that get rescued, they live in a no-kill shelter. That's so important. It's a sanctuary for life. These guys take care of them from the time that they get rescued until the rest of their lives. They get taken care of, all of the things that they need, veterinary care, as I said, food, all the things that you want to make sure that your cat or dog or horse or animal would have. They take care of it in a no-kill shelter, which is so important right now. And if you go to deltarescue.org, you can help them, because it's just our contributions that allow them to do all this great work. That's it. They get no other funding except for what we do to help them. So if you are an animal lover and can give anything, $5, $10, $20, no donation is too small. They will make sure that you get their monthly letter to hear about all the great work they do and tell you about some really fascinating, sort of sad stories that they've turned around to help animals. That's so great. So dog lovers, cat lovers, any kind of animal lover, go to deltarescue.org. Please help them help these animals that need our help and save them and put them in an environment that will get them the help that they need for life. So one of the things that has garnered a lot of attention, especially from folks on the right, which I think was initially dismissed, but seems to be gaining more traction in states like New Hampshire, is this idea that at some point under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which talks about anyone, who is engaged in insurrection, that he will be removed from the ballot. And the Secretary of State in New Hampshire has said that he is seeking an opinion from the Attorney General. Now, let me play this out for you a second. You take New Hampshire, Michigan, maybe Pennsylvania, and say, we're going to remove him from because of the 14th Amendment, because he engaged in an insurrection, even though he's never been charged with an insurrection, even though he's been guilty, whatever. But play this out for me. And then there's an election where almost by default, Trump will be unable to get 270 electoral votes. Would there be any recourse?
Of course, there would be recourse to the Supreme Court. The problem is that, Professor Lawrence Tribe and Judge Ludick have made up this story. I know the 14th Amendment as well as they do. It was designed to make sure that people who fought for the South in the Civil War didn't get elected to state or federal positions. The amendment itself has all kind of provisions in it that show it's related to the Civil War. It talks about enslaved people. It talks about paying the debts of the southern states. It talks about all the things relating to the Civil War. And then suddenly they interpret this as self-enforcing. There's no process. It doesn't say it has to be part of an indictment. It doesn't say the Senate has to do it or the House has to do it. With impeachment, we have a process. With the 25th Amendment, we have a process. With the 14th Amendment, it's, quote, self-enforcing, which means Lawrence Tribe and Judge Ludick can say, we have an opinion that we think he's engaged in insurrection or rebellion. And if the Secretary of State, who nobody's ever heard of, concludes that, he determines who the next president of the United States is. Do you really think the framers of the 14th Amendment had that undemocratic, anti-democratic view in mind? No, obviously not. This is made up by radical zealots, some of them Republicans, by the way, like Judge Ludick, who are part of the Get Trump posse. They're so anti-Trump, they're prepared to destroy the Constitution. They're prepared to use any means toward the end of getting Trump. And that's why it's so important for Democrats like me and liberals to fight against my fellow Democrats who are misusing the Constitution for their own partisan political ends. For me, the Constitution is more important than party affiliation.
Okay, so this is where I need your help then, because so let's just hypothetically say, for the sake of argument, that New Hampshire, Michigan, Pennsylvania remove Trump from the ballot. I have long believed that, unless he could get an immediate relief on that ballot, that there would be an election and the Dems would say, well, sorry, the election happened. You say the Supreme Court. When would the Supreme Court intervene, and would there be enough time? Because part of the problem is once the ballots are printed, he wasn't on it. And can't.
Believe me, I understand that. I represented the people who were victimized by the Butterfly Ballot in Palm Beach.
Okay, and what's the recourse then? Once the election happens,
the recourse is it would be an illegitimate election if Trump was disqualified in enough states that could have put him over the top. The election would be illegitimate, and the Supreme Court hopefully would hold that before the election. It might have to have an extreme remedy, postponing the election for a week or 10 days, or making ballots printed on an emergency 24/7 basis. One would hope you wouldn't have to undo an election and call for a new election day. That's never happened in American history, even during the Civil War, even during the First and Second World Wars. We always have our elections on the right day. But these radical anti-Trump zealots like Tribe and Ludick are destroying democracy. They're calling for remedies that would undo the right of people in certain states to cast their ballot. that's just unconstitutional. Everybody over the age of, we fought so hard to change the Constitution. Black people can vote, women can vote, young people can vote, but Republicans can't vote, according to Lawrence Tribe and Ludick, because they're afraid they might vote for Donald Trump. And electing Donald Trump, they think, is worse than destroying the Constitution. I don't agree.
So in the book, you said that, you lay out all four of these cases. You've got the Alvin Bragg case in New York. You've got two Jack Smith cases, right? Florida and D.C. And then you've got this Fani Willis case down in Georgia. From your perspective, if you're handicapping the four indictments, rank them from 1 to 4 in terms of concern to the Trump team.
Well, I think there are two ways of ranking them. The strongest case is the Florida case, in which Donald Trump is on video waving a material saying it was classified, I could have declassified it, I didn't, it's secret. That's a smoking cigarette butt case. Why do I say smoking? It's like a smoking gun, but it's such a tiny little case, it's a cigarette butt. So many people have had classified material. That's not worthy of being brought, but it's the strongest case. The weakest by far is New York, but it's New York, it's Manhattan. I don't think Jefferson, Adams, Lincoln, Jesus, and Muhammad could win a case for Donald Trump in New York. So that's a tough case for him. The D.C. case by far is the hardest because it's a good prosecutor generally. A thin case, not like Georgia, which is a bizarre case. And it's in the District of Columbia, where 95% or so of the people voted against Trump, and probably 80% hate him. And it's in a district where there's not a lot of voir dire of jurors. So I would think that Trump has the greatest concern about D.C. Also, if he loses in D.C., it strengthens the argument that he's committed insurrection or rebellion, even though he's not charged with that. You can then interpret that verdict in that way, and it would strengthen the 14th Amendment case. So I think by far the most challenging case for Trump is the D.C. case. I think the Georgia case, parts of it will be thrown out. It's a mess, 19 defendants. Some of them want a speedy trial, some of them want a slow trial. But D.C., with a March 4th trial day, poses the greatest challenge to Donald Trump. And his lawyers are probably up to it, but no lawyer can read 71,000 pages a day. It's just impossible.
Well, they can read your book and then hopefully be ready to know what to look for.
No, that won't be enough. That won't be enough. That'll be enough to have a conversation with me, but not enough to stand in front of 12 jurors and defend a man's life and liberty.
Let me get back to that Georgia case for just a second. You mentioned you've got Trump and then 18 co-defendants. How does something like that work? I mean, you mentioned some of them want a speedy trial. Some of them wanted to go to federal court. Some of them have disparate interests. How does that have to stay together, or can it start to get broken apart? And if it gets broken apart, how do you control what happens in one not affecting another?
It will be broken apart. It has to be broken apart because Georgia has a speedy trial statute that if the defendant seeks it, and two of the defendants so far have sought speedy trial, and a third one is about to, I think, they have no choice but to give them that speedy trial in a couple of months. Now, they can't bring Donald Trump to trial in 2 or 3 months, so there's going to have to be a severance. Look, the DA down there just lied through her teeth to the American public and to her constituents when she basically said, I could bring this case to trial in 6 months with all the defendants together. No, she can't. She knows it. And she knows she was misleading the American public. This case will have to be divided into several units. And that, of course, gives the defense some advantage because they get to see a preview of the Trump case in the case against Cheeseborough and Powell, some of the others. So it's going to be a mess. I mean, it was so foolish to indict 19 people and to indict them under RICO. If they had a clean, small case, maybe they could have tried it in a reasonable period of time. But this case is a logistical nightmare.
You mentioned,
and the judge is probably the judge's kid. I mean, just newly to the bench with very little experience. How that judge is going to handle this is going to be a real test. I hear good things about the judge, but no judge can handle a case like this and give everybody a fair trial.
Yeah, I think this judge is going to be as popular or as well known as Lance Ito at some point. But you mentioned your role in Bush v. Gore in 2000. One of the things that they've gone after Trump and his team for is these fake electors. And where's the line between his ability to work within the process, meaning petition his government, call Brad Raffensperger, call different people in the government and make his case, versus what would be deemed maybe a criminal act? And how much should they look at Bush v. Gore in 2000 as a guide? They
should look at it very closely. Anything that requires you to ask the question, where do they draw the line, shouldn't be the subject of criminal prosecution. You know, it was Thomas Jefferson who once said, a criminal statute has to be so clear that a reasonable person can understand it if he reads it while running. I've read these things while sitting with 60 years of experience, and I have to tell you, I don't understand the difference between legal and illegal. You know, people on one side call it fake electors. People on the other side call it alternate electors. In Hawaii, they had alternate electors in 1960. There is a memorandum that Professor Tribe wrote along with Cheeseborough, who was then his research assistant, which set out a whole bunch of ways of challenging Gore versus Bush versus Gore. I was not part of the Gore defense team, but I was the lawyer for the voters of Palm Beach County complaining about the Butterfly Ballot, where thousands of Jewish people voted accidentally for Pat Buchanan, who they hated, because they thought they were voting for Joe Lieberman because his hole was next to the Joe Lieberman name, and they wanted to vote for the first Jew who was ever on a national ballot. We brought that to the attention of the authorities that day, but there was nothing that could be done. It was too late. And that election may very well have been determined.
But that gets back to my point, though. Professor, that actually gets back to the other point, that there seems to be this sense of, oh, well, and I think obviously, you know, there is a case to be discussed with respect to these people who voted because of the mechanism, the butterfly ballot that they were trying to punch, and we had hanging chads and quasi-hanging chads and all that kind of stuff. But to your point, it seems like they ruled afterwards, oh, well, the vote has been taken. There's nothing we can do. And that's kind of what I was asking you before.
That's right.
My concern is that the court looks at what happens if Trump's removed from the ballot and says, well, too bad. It's the votes happened. We can't undo it.
You can't do that. The American public would not stand for an election which was determined by some Secretary of State taking a candidate off the ballot under the 14th Amendment.
But how's that different than what? But isn't that the argument that you're making in Palm Beach, that you said because of this butterfly ballot?
That's right.
These people wanted to vote for Joe Lieberman as vice president to Al Gore. They were, and it was enough of them were clearly, you know, undermined in their effort to do that. That's what I get, though, is that they clearly overlooked it once. And now
I think that's right. What happened is Al Gore didn't want us to bring that any further. And he ordered us not to bring the butterfly ballot case to the upper courts. And obviously we listened to him. I think that was a mistake. But his view was, what could be done about it? You can't have another election. How can we prove that these Jewish voters who voted for Buchanan really would have voted for Al Gore? It's obvious, common sense, but it would be difficult to prove in a court of law. And that would be true here, too. You know, you would disqualify them from a state, and then they would argue, well, who knows how the state would have gone. New Hampshire maybe would have gone against Trump, maybe other states. So it would be speculative. That's why it's important for the Supreme Court to get these cases now, to take them up before the election, before the primaries. But that's a big ask. The Supreme Court likes to take its time. And I think that the sophisticated get Trump lawyers on the other side are taking advantage of this. They're using their knowledge of the law to deprive Americans of their right to vote.
So as someone who has been through this a while, obviously Professor Emeritus at Harvard, you've written not just Get Trump, but I think you're up to like 542 books.
No, just 52. Just 52.
Yeah, 52. Okay. So, and you've covered it from all different angles. We use a word a lot these days in society, the weaponization of. Do you think that the weaponization, if I can use the term now, of the judicial system, of these laws to get Trump, will have a profound, lasting impact on how the law goes forward? Meaning, folks on the right now are going to say, great, we're going to use it to go after so-and-so. We're going to go after so-and-so in more Republican or conservative-friendly jurisdictions.
I have no doubt that's going to happen. Weaponization, started by people like Professor Tribe, is contagious. There'll be tit-for-tat misuses of it on all sides, and it will become part of our system of injustice. It's a terrible phenomenon that's going on. You know, throughout our history, people have said, oh, this is different. You have to suspend this right. It's different. We have to put 110,000 Japanese Americans in detention centers. It's different. We have to make sure that anybody who was on the left can't run for office, and McCarthyism. That's different. The communist threat was, everybody always says it's different. And today people are saying Trump is different. You know, when Larry David, who was a good friend of mine, who I helped his kid get into college, I, entertained him at my house, he used my gym. When he starts screaming at me in Chilmark, Massachusetts, saying, I'm disgusting, I'm despicable, I could see the veins in his head almost bursting. It was as if he was talking to Heinrich Himmler, and I had just defended Adolf Hitler. He sees Donald Trump as Adolf Hitler. And I've had people tell me that and attack me for in any way defending the rights of Adolf Hitler. What would you have done if Adolf Hitler asked you to be his lawyer? I'll tell you what I would have done. I would have killed him with my bare hands, because Adolf Hitler is unique in history, and you can't make those comparisons to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is running for office. I'm going to vote against him. You're going to vote for him. That's what America is about. Let the process go forward. Let it not be interfered with by the weaponization of our judicial system, which will become permanent. It will become permanent. The new McCarthyism is becoming the new Americanism, and that's the great tragedy.
Let me ask you one more question, because I'm going to talk about this later in the week. You defended Donald Trump, as you said, not because you politically agree with him, because the law and how the thing was brought. There's a lot of talk now by Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans about impeaching Biden. Do you think that because of this effort to get Trump on the impeachment side, not the legal side, that we've now weaponized impeachment and we've changed what was meant to be high crimes and misdemeanors to we're just going to get anyone who's out of...
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're going to go and try to get ready. Congresswoman Brobart has introduced articles of impeachment. They are just as invalid as the articles of impeachment were against Donald Trump. They are misreading the Constitution, Republicans. You can't accuse right now on the record Biden of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. You need to have criminal-type behavior akin to treason and bribery. That's the argument I made in front of the Senate. I made that for Donald Trump. I would make the same argument for Joe Biden. For me, I don't care about the politics of it. I care only about the constitutionality.
Okay. Professor Alan Dershowitz, the author of 52 books, including the latest, Get Trump, where you predicted literally these 4 indictments. Go buy the book. It's a great, I would say it's an addition to the conversation that we just had. But as always, you break down things in such an easy, simplistic way that us non-lawyers can understand it. I always appreciate your time and your counsel. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
There's a lot of guests, a lot of smart lawyers out there that we could have had on, and we will. But I thought it was important. Do you hear what he said, though, about the reality of that Supreme Court challenge? This is real stuff. This is a guy who is a left-wing Democrat that didn't vote for Trump ever. He's telling us the playbook, what they're going to do. This isn't some conspiracy theory. This is reality. This is what's happening. The idea, I mean, he literally titled the book, Get Trump, for a reason. That's what they want to do. They don't care about the law. And I've had countless lawyers tell me it doesn't matter what the law is anymore. That's what they're going to do. So hearing from him should underscore how important this thing is right now. They want to get Trump. They want to bar him from running for office. They want to go after people who are associated with them. They want people who might support him to think twice going into this election. Think about that. They want to make sure that it's so unpalatable, the laws against him. Damn be the consequences for the future. The Constitution, the law. So think about what he said, because it's not to be misstated or underappreciated. This is what's coming down the pike. And you heard me ask him over and over because I think it's so true. What happens if they pull him off the ballot? Oh, Americans are going to be outraged. I agree with him. But do you think that these guys don't think that? The folks in New Hampshire, Michigan, Pennsylvania, et cetera? You don't think that they think that this is going to be a problem? That they're going to face outrage? I don't know that they care. They'll be hailed as a hero by Joy Reid on MSNBC. They know that this is going to be divisive. They want to be heroes. Why do you think that Fani Willis in Georgia is doing what she's doing? Lawyers, even on the left and never Trumpers, are saying this is insane. 19 defendants. But she's a hero. We played that clip yesterday. The left loves her for standing up, making Trump do the mugshot. That's what they're going for. This is what's at stake. And you're not hearing this on CNN, the Washington Post, Politico. They're not giving you this kind of breakdown because they don't want you to be worried about the law or the Constitution or the country. They want to get Trump. So understand what's happening. If someone like Alan Dershowitz is going to give you the warning, take it seriously. So we're going to continue to talk about these issues and give you insight and guests that bring you a perspective that you're not going to see anywhere else. Once again, I thank you for watching. I thank you for sharing. Thank you for the support of our sponsors. Please do me that favor, as I asked before. Like the show, subscribe on all of the platforms, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble. It helps us grow. It helps us the success of the show. I appreciate all that. I'll see you back here tomorrow on The Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.